The New Mexico Territory, 1885. Blood stained the parched earth of what was once the Reynolds homestead. Amidst the ruins, 10-year-old Thomas clutched his sister's hand, their parents' bodies still warm behind them. 2 days without food had made the boy desperate enough to approach the lone Apache warrior watching from the ridge, a man whose people had warred with settlers for generations. With trembling legs, Thomas stood before him, offering the only thing of value he had left. His 16-year-old sister, Sarah. The warrior's obsidian eyes revealed nothing as he studied the siblings. What could drive a child to such desperation? And what could move a hardened warrior to accept? Would ancient hatreds dissolve in the face of shared suffering? Or would this unusual arrangement only bring more pain to those already broken by loss? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maka had watched the settlement burn from a distance. He hadn't participated in the raid. Those days were behind him, but neither had he intervened. The Apache warrior sat motionless atop his paint horse, the sacred eagle feather in his hair dancing with the desert breeze. 3 summers had passed since soldiers had taken his wife and son, yet the wound remained as fresh as the day it happened. He had intended to simply pass by, continuing his solitary existence, but something held him there. Perhaps it was the memory of his own loss that kept him watching the smoldering ruins. For 2 days, he observed the 2 surviving children from afar, expecting someone to come for them. No one did. By the 2nd day, he knew they wouldn't last much longer. The boy had tried to find food but returned empty-handed each time. The girl had been rationing what little water remained. They would die soon without help. His people would not understand why he cared. The white settlers had taken Apache land, hunted their game, poisoned their water. Yet as Maka watched the children's desperate struggle, he saw not enemies but reflections of his own lost family. When the boy finally approached him, Maka was surprised by the child's courage. The small figure walked deliberately up the ridge, faltering but never stopping. The warrior tensed, hand instinctively moving to his knife. "Please," the boy said, voice cracking from thirst. "We need help." Maka remained silent, face impassive as he'd been taught since childhood. Show no emotion to strangers, especially white ones. "My sister," the boy continued, gesturing to the girl who stood watching from below. "She's all I have left. Please take her as your wife, sir." The words hung in the air between them. Maka studied the boy's face, searching for deceit but finding only naked desperation. "I know you're Apache," the boy added quickly. "I know your people and mine fight, but we'll die without help. Sarah's a good worker. She can cook and sew and," his voice broke, "and she's pretty. She'll be a good wife." Maka's gaze shifted to the girl. She stood tall despite everything, her golden hair matted with dirt and blood, her dress torn and filthy. Her eyes met his across the distance, filled not with fear but with resolute dignity. She had agreed to this proposal, he realized. She was willing to sacrifice herself for her brother. "How old?" Maka asked, his English broken but clear enough. "I'm 10. Sarah's 16. The boy answered promptly. Maka dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate to avoid frightening the child. Up close, he could see the boy was on the verge of collapse, sunburnt, dehydrated, and hollow-eyed with hunger and grief. "Your name?" Maka asked. "Thomas Reynolds." "That's my sister, Sarah." Maka nodded once, then reached for his water pouch, offering it to the boy. Thomas took it with trembling hands, drinking deeply before catching himself and stopping. "Sarah needs this too," he said, turning to signal his sister. The girl approached cautiously, her movements stiff with exhaustion. Up close, Maka could see she was barely holding herself together, maintaining composure only for her brother's sake. "Drink," Maka instructed, gesturing to the water pouch Thomas held out to her. She took it, her eyes never leaving Maka's face as she drank. When she finished, she handed it back with a whispered, "Thank you." Maka considered his options. His dwelling was remote, far from both settler towns and Apache camps. He had chosen isolation after his loss, unable to bear the pitying glances of his tribespeople. Taking these children would end that solitude and possibly bring danger. Yet leaving them meant certain death. "Come," he said finally, mounting his horse and extending a hand down to help the boy up behind him. "Long journey. Start now." Thomas looked at Sarah questioningly. She gave a small nod, and Maka saw the weight of that decision in her eyes, the sacrifice she was agreeing to, the uncertain future she was accepting. As they began their journey, Maka felt the eagle feather in his hair flutter in the wind. His ancestors were watching. Whether they approved of his decision or not, he could not say. Sarah Reynolds clutched her family Bible to her chest as they traveled. The leather-bound book, the only possession she'd managed to save besides the silver locket around her neck. 6 months ago, her father had announced they were leaving Missouri for the New Mexico territory, chasing promises of cheap land and new beginnings. Her mother had packed their belongings while singing hymns, convinced God would protect them on their journey west. God hadn't protected them from the raid. She glanced at Thomas, riding behind the Apache warrior. Her brother's face was gaunt, his eyes too old for a 10-year-old. He had been the one to pull her from their burning home, to drag her away from their parents' bodies. And now he had bartered her away like cattle. Yet she couldn't blame him. What choice did they have? The nearest town was 3 days' walk, and they wouldn't have survived another night without food and water. Thomas had made the only decision possible. "Sarah," Thomas called, breaking her reverie. "Mr. Maka says we're stopping soon." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The warrior, Maka, had barely spoken during their journey, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning them of rough terrain ahead. His English was limited but clear, his voice deep and measured. When they stopped by a small spring, Sarah helped Thomas down from the horse, noticing how light he'd become. She needed to get food into him soon. "Rest here," Maka instructed, dismounting with fluid grace. "Water good. I find food." He disappeared into the scrubby vegetation before Sarah could respond, leaving the siblings alone with his horse. "He seems kind," Thomas ventured, sipping water from his cupped hands. "We don't know what he is," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. "Don't forget what his people did to our settlement." "We don't know it was his people," Thomas argued. "And he's helping us now." Sarah sighed, too exhausted to debate. She opened her Bible, finding comfort in the familiar pages. Her fingers traced over the family record, births, deaths, marriages, all recorded in her mother's careful handwriting. Would she soon be adding her own marriage to an Apache warrior? The thought made her stomach clench. She'd had dreams once, of a proper courtship, a kind husband who would read poetry to her in the evenings, children with her blue eyes and her husband's smile. Now her future had narrowed to mere survival. Maka returned with 2 rabbits. He prepared them without speaking, his movements efficient as he skinned and gutted them before setting them to roast over a small fire. The smell made Sarah's mouth water painfully. "You have more family?" Maka asked as they ate, breaking the long silence. Thomas shook his head. "Our grandparents died before I was born. We had an uncle in St. Louis, but he stopped writing years ago." Maka nodded, seeming to absorb this information. His dark eyes shifted to Sarah, who tensed under his gaze. "You afraid?" he stated rather than asked. Sarah straightened her spine. "Yes, but I'll honor our arrangement." Something flickered across Maka's face. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "No arrangement yet. First safe place. Then decide." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest. Was he offering them a chance to reconsider? Or was he the one reconsidering? "My home," Maka continued, Far from here. Hidden place. Safe from. He gestured vaguely eastward, where cavalry patrols occasionally rode. As the light faded, Maka indicated they should sleep. Sarah positioned herself between him and Thomas, a futile protective gesture. If the warrior meant them harm, there was little she could do. Yet as night deepened, Sarah found herself studying Maka in the dying firelight. He sat with his back against a boulder, alert even in rest. The eagle feather in his hair caught occasional moonlight. There was a dignity to him, a stillness that spoke of deep pain endured. She thought of the way he had gently helped Thomas drink, how he'd ensured she ate before taking food himself. These were not the actions of the savage her father had warned about. This was a man who, despite every reason to hate them, had chosen mercy. As Sarah finally drifted to sleep, the Bible still clutched to her chest. She found herself praying for the first time since the raid. Not just for Thomas and herself, but for the warrior who had saved them. To be why midday on the third day of travel, they reached Makara's dwelling. A small but sturdy structure nestled against a red rock canyon wall, nearly invisible until they were upon it. A clear spring bubbled nearby, and a small corral held a second horse. Home, Maka announced simply, helping Thomas down. Sarah dismounted unassisted, taking in their surroundings. The isolation was both terrifying and reassuring. No one would find them here, for better or worse. As Maka tended to his horse, Thomas swayed suddenly, his face alarmingly pale. Thomas! Sarah reached for him just as his legs buckled. Dizzy, he mumbled before his eyes rolled back. Sarah cried out, cradling her brother as he collapsed. His skin burned against hers, fever raging through his small body. Maka was beside them instantly, his face grave as he felt Thomas's forehead. Without a word, he lifted the boy and carried him into the dwelling, laying him on a pallet of woven blankets. How long sick? He asked sharply. He wasn't, Sarah began, then remembered Thomas's unusual quietness during the journey, the way he'd refused food that morning. Maybe since yesterday. He didn't tell me. Maka's mouth tightened. He reached for a leather pouch hanging from a ceiling beam, his medicine pouch, and began extracting small bundles of dried plants. Need water, he instructed. Spring clean. Use this. He pointed to a clay bowl. Sarah hurried to comply, fear making her clumsy. When she returned, Maka was removing Thomas's shirt, revealing angry red welts on the boy's chest and back. What is it? Sarah whispered, terror constricting her throat. Bad sickness. Comes sometimes after. Maka hesitated, searching for the right word. After big fear. Body fights too hard. Can you help him? Sarah knelt beside her brother, taking his limp hand. Maka didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began grinding herbs with a stone mortar, adding water from the bowl. The pungent smell filled the small space. I try, he said finally. Was medicine man before warrior? This revelation startled Sarah. You're a healer? Maka nodded once, continuing his work. Many warriors know healing, must fix what we break. He created a paste from the herbs and spread it gently across Thomas's chest. Next, he mixed different plants with water, creating a bitter-smelling tea. Help him drink, Maka instructed. Sarah cradled Thomas's head, helping Maka administer the medicine drop by drop. Thomas moaned but didn't wake. As night fell, Thomas's fever raged higher. He thrashed in delirium, calling for their parents. Sarah bathed his forehead with cool water, singing the lullabies their mother had once sung, her voice breaking. Maka watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he left. Sarah's heart sank. Had he decided they were too much trouble? Would he abandon them now with Thomas so ill? Hours passed. Thomas's breathing grew labored. Sarah prayed fervently, clutching her mother's silver locket, begging God not to take her brother too. Near midnight, Maka returned, soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. In his hands were fresh plants, roots and leaves Sarah didn't recognize. "Found medicine," he said simply, immediately setting to work preparing a new remedy. Relief weakened Sarah's knees. "I thought you'd left us." Maka paused, looking at her directly. "I give my word. Not leave." The simplicity of his statement carried more weight than elaborate promises. Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. Together they worked through the night, Maka preparing medicines, Sarah administering them and cooling Thomas's fevered body. Occasionally their hands would brush, and Sarah found herself drawing strength from Makara's steady presence. Near dawn, Thomas's fever finally broke. He slipped into a peaceful sleep, his breathing easier. "He live," Maka said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Need rest now." "Many days." Sarah realized she was swaying with fatigue herself. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on him." Maka studied her face. "He is brave boy, like little warrior." A shadow passed over his features. "Reminds me of my son." The admission hung in the air between them, a glimpse into Maka's closely guarded heart. Before Sarah could respond, he rose and moved to the doorway. "You sleep," he said. "I watch." As Sarah curled beside her brother, she realized something had shifted. In fighting together to save Thomas, they had formed a fragile bond. Not the bond of husband and wife, but of two people united against death's shadow. 3 days passed before Thomas opened his eyes with true awareness. During that time, Sarah rarely left his side, while Maka continued preparing remedies using an ancestral clay water jug decorated with intricate tribal patterns. He explained that the vessel had belonged to his grandmother, who had taught him the healing arts. "Medicine stronger in old vessels," he told Sarah as he mixed a tonic. "Holds memory of past healing." When Thomas finally woke properly, his first words were, "I'm hungry." Sarah laughed through tears of relief, embracing her brother carefully. Maka, hearing the boy's voice, appeared in the doorway with a hint of a smile softening his stern features. "Good sign," he said, bringing a wooden bowl of broth. "Eat slow." As Thomas recovered strength, Sarah began exploring their new surroundings. Maka's dwelling consisted of the main structure built against the canyon wall, a small corral for the horses, and a storage area beneath a rock overhang. Everything was arranged for efficiency and protection, the work of a man accustomed to self-reliance. One morning, Sarah found Maka outside, watching the sunrise. She approached hesitantly, still uncertain of her place in this strange arrangement. "Thomas is sleeping peacefully," she reported. Maka nodded. "Fever gone, but body weak. Need time." "How much time?" Sarah asked. "Many weeks before strong again." Maka turned to face her. "Cannot travel until snow season passes." The implications settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. They would be here for months, dependent on this man they barely knew. "About our arrangement," she began awkwardly. "Thomas offered me as your wife, but—" "No wife," Maka interrupted firmly. "Not like that." Sarah blinked in surprise. "But you agreed." "Agreed to help," Maka clarified. "Children alone die in desert. I help." "No expect." He gestured vaguely, seeming uncomfortable. "No expect wife duties." Heat rose to Sarah's cheeks as understanding dawned. "Oh!" Relief flooded her, followed immediately by confusion. If not as his wife, what was her place here? As if reading her thoughts, Maka continued, "You stay until boy strong, until safe season for travel. Then decide." "Decide what?" "Where to go. What to do." He shrugged. "Maybe settler town. Maybe stay. Your choice when time comes." Sarah studied him, trying to understand this unexpected generosity. "Why would you do this? Your people and mine are enemies." Maka was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the horizon. "Lost my family to soldiers," he finally said. Wife, son, gone. No pain of losing all. The simple statement explained more than 1,000 words could have. Sarah felt a sudden kinship with this warrior who had also known devastating loss. I'm sorry, she said softly. Maka nodded once, accepting her sympathy. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now you learn, Maka replied. Learn to live here. Find food. Make medicine. Stay safe. He pointed to plants growing near the spring. These good to eat. Those for washing. Those poison never touch. Sarah realized he was offering to teach her, to help her survive in this harsh land. It was a gift more valuable than protection alone. That evening, as Thomas sat up for his first full meal, Maka brought out a small portion of dried berries for dessert, a rare treat in the desert. Special medicine, he told Thomas with the ghost of a smile. Sweet medicine for brave warriors. Thomas beamed at being called a warrior. Will you teach me to be brave like you? Something flickered in Maka's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Already brave, he said quietly. Faced death for sister. True warrior spirit. Later, as Thomas slept, Sarah stepped outside to find Maka carving a piece of wood by firelight. She sat nearby, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Thank you, she said after a comfortable silence, for saving Thomas, for giving us time. Maka continued carving, his hands steady and sure. Everyone deserves time, he replied simply. Time to heal. Time to choose path. In that moment, Sarah understood that their unusual arrangement was not about ownership or obligation, but about something far more precious. The gift of a second chance. 2 weeks passed, establishing an unexpected rhythm to their lives. Each morning, Sarah woke at dawn to help Maka prepare the day's meals. Thomas, still weak but improving daily, would sit outside wrapped in blankets, watching the desert awaken. Look, Sarah, Thomas called one morning, pointing to a pair of hawks circling overhead. Mr. Maka says they're mates. They stay together for life. Sarah noticed her brother's growing admiration for the Apache warrior. Thomas followed Maka with his eyes whenever the man was present, soaking up every word and gesture like parched earth absorbing rain. When Thomas became strong enough to walk short distances, Maka began teaching him to use a small hunting bow. Sarah watched from the doorway as Maka adjusted Thomas's stance with gentle hands, demonstrating the proper way to nock an arrow. Breathe with the bow, Maka instructed. Feel target before release. Thomas's first attempts missed widely, but Maka never showed impatience. His teaching style was one of quiet demonstration rather than lengthy explanation. By the 5th day of practice, Thomas hit the target, a dried gourd, and his whoop of joy echoed off the canyon walls. Maka permitted himself a rare smile. Good. Tomorrow, moving targets. That night, Thomas chattered excitedly about his progress while Sarah prepared dinner. Maka had gone hunting at dawn and returned with a young deer across his horse's back. The meat would sustain them for days. Maka says I might be ready to hunt rabbits by next month, Thomas said, his eyes bright with pride. He says I have good eyes. That's wonderful, Sarah replied, though privately she felt a twist of concern. The more Thomas bonded with Maka, the harder their eventual parting would be, if they ever left. Later, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Sarah stepped outside to find Maka sitting by the small fire, repairing a saddle strap by the flickering light. May I join you? She asked. Maka nodded, shifting to make room on the log he used as a seat. Sarah sat, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Thomas is becoming attached to you, she said after a moment. Maka continued his work, his strong hands moving with practiced precision. Boy needs man to learn from. Natural. And when we leave? Sarah asked. It will break his heart. Maka's hands paused briefly. Why think of leaving now? Still winter coming. Long months ahead. I need to think of our future, Sarah insisted. We can't impose on you forever. Not impose. Maka's voice held a note of something Sarah couldn't identify. Perhaps hurt? Place big enough. Food enough. Sarah studied his profile in the firelight. The planes of his face were sharp, weathered by sun and hardship, yet there was nothing cruel in his expression. In these weeks, she had never seen him act with anything but consideration toward them. I don't understand why you're doing this, she admitted. Taking care of strangers, children of your enemies. Maka was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. After family died, I became ghost. Not living, not dead. Walking between worlds. He gestured toward the dwelling where Thomas slept. Boy brought me back to living world. Asked for help. Made me choose help or turn away. Choosing to help, I choose to live again. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep in Sarah. She had also been living as a ghost since the raid, focused only on keeping Thomas alive. I understand, she said softly. Thank you for choosing to help. That night, Sarah was awakened by Makara's voice, sharp with distress. She rose quietly and saw him outside, sitting bolt upright by the dying fire, his breathing ragged. A nightmare, she realized. She hesitated, uncertain whether to approach. In their time here, she had maintained careful boundaries, still wary despite his kindness. Yet the sound of his pain called to her own. Deciding, she returned to her blankets. Some ghosts were too personal to witness. She understood that all too well. The next morning, neither mentioned his nightmares, but something had shifted. A shared recognition of private wounds, an acknowledgement of the damage they both carried. It wasn't friendship, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Sarah's boots were falling apart. She'd noticed the soul separating weeks ago but had said nothing. Every morning, she stuffed the gaps with scraps of cloth, but the high desert terrain was unforgiving on footwear. By the end of each day, her feet were raw and bleeding. She thought she'd hidden her discomfort well, but one evening, Maka appeared beside her as she washed dishes at the spring. Boots no good, he stated, looking pointedly at her footwear. Sarah flushed. They'll last a while longer. Maka made a skeptical sound and walked away. 3 days later, he returned from hunting with more than game. As they finished dinner, he retrieved a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin and placed it before her. For walking, he said simply. Sarah unwrapped the bundle to find a pair of beautifully crafted moccasins. The soft hide was adorned with careful beadwork. Not elaborate, but precisely done in a pattern of blue and white that complemented her eyes. You made these? She asked, astonished by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Maka nodded. Measured from old boots while you slept. At her startled look, he added, Not enter sleeping place. Boots left outside. Sarah ran her fingers over the fine stitching. They're beautiful. Thank you. Try, he encouraged. She slipped them on, marveling at the perfect fit and immediate comfort. They feel wonderful. Good for quiet walking, Maka explained. Soft step like deer, not hard clomping like soldier boots. Thomas laughed at this description. Sarah always walked so loud in church that Mama said she sounded like a cavalry charge. The memory of their mother brought a momentary shadow, but Sarah smiled through it. These will help me be stealthier then. Later, while Thomas practiced his letters using charcoal on a flat stone, Makara's idea to keep his education continuing, Sarah decided to organize their meager possessions. Maka had gone to check his traps, giving her rare privacy in the main dwelling. On a high shelf, she discovered a small pouch she hadn't noticed before. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she carefully opened it. Inside was a tiny carved wooden toy, a horse no bigger than her thumb, and a lock of black hair tied with sinew, a memory token of his lost child. Private things. Sarah startled at Makara's voice, nearly dropping the pouch. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, replacing the pouch. "I shouldn't have." "Sit," Maka interrupted, entering the dwelling and lowering himself to a cross-legged position on a woven mat. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah sat opposite him. To her surprise, Maka reached for the pouch, opening it and removing the tiny horse. "My son's," he said quietly, "made for his 4th naming day. Last gift before soldiers came." Sarah's throat tightened. "What was his name?" "Talasi," Maka replied. "It means corn tassel in my language. Born when corn was high." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good boy. Laugh much. Like your Thomas." "And your wife?" Sarah asked gently. "Kimmy," he said, "means secret. Quiet woman, but strong spirit." He carefully replaced the toy in the pouch. 3 summers now they walk in spirit world. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, understanding now the depth of his loss. Do you hate all white people because of what happened?" Maka considered this. Hated, yes, for a long time. Wanted to kill, burn, destroy. His gaze met hers directly. "But hate is like drinking poison and hoping enemy dies. An end only kills self." The wisdom in his words struck Sarah deeply. She thought of her own father's warnings about bloodthirsty savages. How those words had fed fear and hatred on both sides. "My father would never have believed I'd be sitting here with you," she admitted. "He taught us that Apaches were dangerous enemies. And my father taught same about white eyes," Maka replied. "Both right, both wrong." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Maka rose, looking toward the doorway. "Big storm comes. Need to secure horses." As he moved past her, Sarah impulsively touched his arm. "Thank you for the moccasins and for telling me about your family." Maka paused, his eyes reflecting something that might have been surprise at her touch. Then he nodded once and continued outside. That night, as rain pounded the dwelling and lightning illuminated the canyon in brief, brilliant flashes, Sarah lay awake listening to Thomas's even breathing. The moccasins sat beside her bedroll, a tangible reminder that in this harsh land, unexpected kindness could bloom like desert flowers after rain. 1 month after their arrival, the rhythms of their unusual household had settled into something resembling normalcy. Thomas had regained his strength and spent most days following Maka like a shadow, absorbing everything the warrior taught him. Sarah had taken over the domestic duties, adapting her mother's recipes to desert ingredients. The moccasins Maka had made her rarely left her feet. On a clear autumn morning, Maka announced he would teach them to read animal tracks. Thomas was immediately enthusiastic, but Sarah hesitated. "I should stay and prepare dinner," she said. Maka shook his head. "Important skill. Need to know if danger comes." Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Sarah agreed. They hiked to a sandy wash half a mile from the dwelling, where Maka pointed out the variety of tracks crossing the terrain. "See here," he said, crouching beside a set of delicate prints. "Deer, female, passed before sunrise, heading to water." Thomas mimicked Maka's posture, studying the tracks intently. "How can you tell it's female?" "Size," Maka explained. "Smaller than buck. Also step pattern, more careful." He moved methodically through the wash, showing them rabbit tracks, coyote prints, and the distinctive trail of a western diamondback rattlesnake. Sarah found herself genuinely interested, especially when Maka demonstrated how to determine how recently the tracks had been made. "Fresh edges," he explained, pointing to a clear print. "Sand still loose. Very new." As they worked their way along the wash, a sound caught Sarah's attention. The distant jingle of harness bells. Maka heard it too, his body tensing instantly. "Wagon," he said, voice low. "Many horses. Not soldiers, wrong direction." "Settlers?" Sarah suggested, heart suddenly racing. Maka nodded grimly. Back to dwelling. Now. But it was too late. As they turned to retreat, 3 riders appeared on the ridge above them. The men reined in sharply at the sight of Maka, hands moving to their weapons. "Behind me," Maka ordered, pushing Thomas and Sarah behind his body. "It's a white girl with that Apache," one rider called to the others. "And a boy." Sarah could see the calculations racing through Maka's mind, whether to fight, flee, or stand his ground. Before he could decide, she stepped forward. "Please don't shoot," she called up to the men. "We're not in danger." The riders exchanged confused glances. One of them, a bearded man in a battered hat, addressed her directly. "Miss, are you being held against your will? Blink twice if you can't speak freely." The absurdity of the situation might have been comical under different circumstances. Sarah drew herself up, summoning every ounce of the composure her mother had instilled in her. "My brother and I are here by choice," she stated firmly. "This man saved our lives after our settlement was raided. He's been caring for us." The men looked skeptical. The bearded one spoke again. "We're headed to Santa Fe. We can take you somewhere safe, away from this arrangement." Sarah felt Maka go utterly still beside her. This was the moment of choice, the opportunity to return to her own kind, to civilization and safety. The logical decision was clear. Yet as she opened her mouth to reply, Sarah realized she didn't want to go. The thought of leaving the canyon, of never seeing Maka again, created an unexpected ache in her chest. "Thank you for your concern," she said, surprising herself with her conviction. "But we're staying. We're safe here." The riders seemed taken aback. They conferred briefly, then the bearded man shrugged. "Your choice, miss. Wagon trains moving on tomorrow if you change your mind." After providing directions to water that would take them away from Maka's dwelling, they watched the riders depart. Only when they were out of sight did Sarah realize she was trembling. Thomas looked up at her with wide eyes. "Were you really going to stay?" "Yes," she answered, the certainty of it settling into her bones. "For now, this is where we belong." She glanced at Maka, finding him watching her with an intensity that made her flush. He said nothing, but when they returned to the dwelling, he disappeared briefly and returned with a small carved wooden horse, similar to but larger than the one he'd made for his son. He presented it to Thomas with a nod. "For brave warrior who stands his ground," he said simply. That evening, as Thomas admired his gift by firelight, Sarah caught Maka's eye across the flames. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Maka nodded once, but something had changed in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps, that they were no longer reluctant guests but something closer to family. 3 months had passed since the raid that orphaned the Reynolds siblings. Summer had surrendered to autumn, painting the canyon walls with golden light in the evenings. Thomas had filled out, his once gaunt face now healthy and tanned. He moved through the terrain with growing confidence, proud of the small game he contributed to their meals. Sarah, too, had changed. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, had grown capable and strong. She had learned to identify medicinal plants, to preserve meat for the coming winter, to move silently in her beaded moccasins. The constant fear that had been her companion since the raid had faded to a distant memory. One evening, Maka returned from a hunting trip with more than meat. He handed Sarah a package wrapped in trade cloth. "For you," he said simply. Inside was a journal made of soft leather with crude paper pages, a small bottle of ink, and a wooden pen. Sarah looked up in surprise. "Found traitor," Maka explained. "Thought you might like to write words again." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Sarah deeply. "Thank you. I've missed writing." That night, she began her first entry. October 12, 1885. Strange how life changes course like a river meeting stone. 3 months ago, I believed I'd lost everything. Now I find myself in this hidden canyon, creating a life I never imagined. Thomas thrives under Maka's guidance. And I am changing too in ways I don't fully understand. The next morning, Sarah found Maka outside the dwelling, studying the family Bible she'd left open on a flat rock. "Do you want to learn to read English?" she asked impulsively. Maka looked up, seeming almost embarrassed to be caught. "Words have power," he said. "Good to understand enemies' words." Sarah smiled at his practical reasoning. "I'm not your enemy anymore." "No," he agreed, a rare smile softening his features. "Not enemy." And so their lessons began. Each evening after dinner, Sarah would teach Maka letters and simple words. He proved a quick study, his memory exceptional. He approached reading with the same intensity he brought to hunting, patient, methodical, determined. "This word," Sarah said one evening, pointing to faith in her Bible. "Faith, Maka sounded out carefully. "Faith. Do you know what it means?" Maka considered. "Believe in what cannot see?" "Yes, exactly," Sarah said, impressed by his insight. "Apache have this too," he replied. Different words, same meaning. These exchanges became Sarah's favorite part of the day. Through teaching Maka, she discovered a keen intelligence behind his reserved exterior. He asked thoughtful questions about not just the mechanics of reading but the meanings and origins of words. One afternoon, their peaceful routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sarah was hanging laundry when Maka suddenly appeared, his expression tense. "Inside," he ordered quietly. "Apache comes." Sarah gathered Thomas and retreated to the dwelling, heart pounding. Through the window opening, she watched as another Apache warrior approached on horseback. Unlike Maka, who dressed simply, this man wore elaborate adornments that spoke of status. His face was painted for war. The two men spoke in their native tongue, the conversation growing increasingly heated. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the visitor's hostile glances toward the dwelling made his opinions clear. He disapproved of Maka harboring white settlers. The visitor dismounted, stepping aggressively toward Maka, who stood his ground. Words flew like arrows between them. When the visitor's hand moved toward his knife, Sarah couldn't contain herself. She stepped outside, ignoring Maka's warning look. "Is there a problem?" she asked, standing straight and proud in her moccasins. The visitor's eyes widened at her boldness. He spat words at Maka, who replied sharply. The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, with a dismissive gesture, the visitor remounted and rode away. Only when he disappeared from sight did Maka's shoulders relax slightly. "Who was that?" Sarah asked. "Nakohi," Maka replied grimly. "War chief of my former band. Not happy I take in white eyes." "Former band," Sarah repeated. "You're not with them anymore?" Maka's expression was unreadable. "Cannot be with tribe and with you. Made choice." The implication stunned Sarah. "You left your people. For us?" "For peace," Maka corrected, though something in his eyes suggested there was more to it. "Tired of hate. Tired of war." That night, writing in her journal by candlelight, Sarah added, "Today I learned that Maka sacrificed his place among his people to protect us. The debt we owe him grows, yet he asks nothing in return. I begin to wonder if Thomas's desperate bargain might have saved more than just our lives." As autumn deepened, Maka announced they needed supplies before winter set in. The nearest trading post was a 2-day ride, and he suggested Thomas accompany him. "Boy should learn trading ways," he explained. "Important skill." Thomas was immediately eager, but Sarah felt an unexpected twist of anxiety at being left behind. Before she could examine the feeling, she found herself saying, "I'd like to come too." Maka studied her face. "Long journey. Rough country. I'm stronger now," she countered. "And I'd rather not stay here alone." After a moment's consideration, Maka nodded. 3 horses then. Leave at dawn." They departed early the next morning, Sarah riding the gentler of Maka's two horses. Thomas chattered excitedly as they traveled, while Maka remained vigilant, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Sarah found herself watching him, admiring the straight line of his back, the quiet authority in his posture. The journey revealed how isolated their canyon truly was. They traversed miles of rugged terrain without encountering another soul. When they camped that night, Maka taught them to make a fire that produced minimal smoke. Less chance of being seen, he explained. Are we in danger? Thomas asked, wide-eyed. Always good to be careful, Maka replied. Not all people friendly to Apache traveling with white children. This stark reminder of their precarious position sobered Sarah. For months, their canyon had been a safe haven, almost separate from the conflicts of the wider world. Out here, the complexities of their situation became apparent again. They reached the trading post by midday on the second day. Perched at a crossroads, it consisted of a main building constructed of rough timber and adobe, with a corral and several outbuildings. A handful of horses and 2 wagons indicated other visitors. Stay close, Maka instructed as they dismounted. Let me speak first. The atmosphere inside the trading post shifted perceptibly when they entered. Conversation halted as all eyes turned to the unusual trio, an Apache warrior accompanied by 2 white children. The trader, a grizzled man with one eye, recovered first. Maka, he greeted with a nod. Been some time. Winters, Maka agreed, approaching the counter. Sarah was surprised by the recognition. Maka had not mentioned knowing the trader. These yours? The trader asked, eyeing Sarah and Thomas with undisguised curiosity. In my care, Maka replied simply, then began listing the supplies they needed. As Maka negotiated, Sarah became aware of hostile murmurs from a group of rough-looking men in the corner. Their hateful glances moved between Maka and the siblings, clearly disapproving of the association. Injun lover. One spat, loud enough to be heard. Thomas stiffened beside her. Sarah placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering, "Ignore them." Maka gave no indication of hearing the slur, continuing his business with calm dignity. The trader, however, shot the men a warning look. "Not in my place, Burke," he said firmly. "Take it outside if you're looking for trouble." The tension remained thick as Maka completed their transaction, receiving a folded receipt that he carefully tucked into his shirt. As they prepared to leave, the trader leaned forward. "Cavalry's been through twice this month," he said quietly. "Looking for renegades. Best keep to the high country." Maka nodded his thanks. Only when they were outside did Sarah dare to ask, "How do you know him?" "Jack One Eye," Maka replied. "Fair trader. I saved his life once. Fever sickness. He remembers." "And those men inside?" Thomas asked. "Hate what they don't understand," Maka said simply. They were loading their supplies when the hostile men emerged from the trading post. The leader, presumably Burke, called out, "Hey girl, blink twice if you need rescuing from this savage." Sarah turned slowly, meeting the man's gaze with cold dignity. "The only savagery I've seen today came from inside that building, and it wasn't from him." Her response clearly surprised the men. Burke's face darkened with anger, but before he could reply, the trader appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Told you to move along, Burke." The men retreated, muttering threats. As they mounted their horses to leave, Sarah noticed Maka watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked. "Brave words," he said. "Dangerous." "It was the truth," she replied. That night, camped in a sheltered hollow far from the trading post, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. The confrontation had reminded her how others would view their unusual family. Sitting up, she noticed Maka still awake, staring at the stars. "Do you regret taking us in?" she asked softly, careful not to wake Thomas. Maka considered her question, his profile strong against the night sky. "No regrets," he finally answered. Path is chosen. Now we walk it. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. A deepening of trust, an acknowledgement of their shared journey. When Maka's hand moved slightly closer to hers on the ground between them, Sarah let her fingers rest beside his, not quite touching but close enough to feel his warmth. The first frost arrived in early November, painting the canyon with delicate white crystals that vanished with the morning sun. Maka studied the sky with increasing attention, reading signs invisible to Sarah's eyes. Hard winter coming, he announced one evening. Need to prepare. The next weeks were filled with purposeful activity. Maka taught them to preserve meat by smoking and drying, to gather and store pine nuts, to reinforce the dwelling against cold winds. Sarah worked alongside him, their hands occasionally brushing as they wove extra blankets from rabbit fur and plant fibers. These small contacts no longer made her flinch. Instead, she found herself noticing the strength in his hands, the careful precision of his movements. When had she stopped seeing him as dangerous? When had his presence become not just reassuring but something she sought out? One morning, Maka discovered Sarah's silver hairpin, her mother's treasured possession, caught in a crevice near the spring. She had believed it lost during the raid. Another irreplaceable piece of her past gone forever. Was looking for tracks, Maka explained, presenting it to her with unexpected gentleness. Saw something shine. Sarah took the hairpin with trembling fingers. My mother wore this on her wedding day, she whispered. I thought it was gone. Not gone, Maka said. Just waiting to be found. Sarah impulsively reached out, squeezing his hand in gratitude. Maka's eyes widened slightly at the contact, but he didn't pull away. For a moment, they remained connected, something unspoken passing between them. Thomas's voice calling from the dwelling broke the moment. Sarah withdrew her hand, tucking the hairpin carefully into her pocket, aware that Maka's eyes followed the movement. Later that day, Thomas joined Maka on a hunting expedition to secure more meat before the heavy snows arrived. Sarah worked alone, preparing storage containers for winter provisions. The domestic rhythm of the task was soothing, reminding her of afternoons spent working beside her mother. Her peaceful reverie was shattered by a shout from outside. She rushed to the doorway to find Thomas being half-carried by Maka, blood staining the boy's leggings. What happened? She gasped, helping guide Thomas to his pallet. Fell on rocks, Maka explained tersely. Cut leg. Sarah quickly gathered clean cloths and water while Maka examined the wound. Thomas was pale but conscious, biting his lip to keep from crying out as they cleaned the deep gash on his thigh. Need stitches, Maka said grimly. Sarah's stomach clenched. She had assisted her mother with minor injuries, but nothing requiring such treatment. I'll do it, Maka continued, seeing her hesitation. Hold him still. With Thomas's head cradled in her lap, Sarah watched as Maka worked with precise efficiency, using a bone needle and sinew thread to close the wound. His hands, so powerful in other contexts, moved with delicate care. Thomas whimpered but held relatively still, his trust in Maka evident. Brave warrior, Maka murmured as he finished, applying a poultice of medicinal herbs over the stitches. No permanent damage, just scar to show courage. Thomas managed a weak smile. Like yours? He asked, referring to the battle scar that ran along Maka's forearm. Better story than mine, Maka replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. You were hunting for family. I was just being foolish young warrior. That night, Sarah and Maka took turns watching over Thomas as fever set in, an expected but concerning development. During her vigil, Sarah studied her brother's face, so peaceful in sleep despite his injury. The boy who had approached an Apache warrior with desperate courage had grown leaner, stronger, happier in these months. Thomas was thriving in this unlikely home they had found. When Maka relieved her near dawn, Sarah hesitated before relinquishing her place beside Thomas. He'll be all right? She asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Strong boy, Maka assured her. Good blood. We'll heal. Impulsively, Sarah leaned forward and placed her hand on Maka's where it rested on Thomas's forehead. Thank you for saving him. Again. Their eyes met in the dim light. Something had changed in how Maka looked at her. A softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks under his gaze. Sleep now, he said softly. I watch over both of you. As the first snow began to fall outside, blanketing the canyon in pristine white, Sarah curled under her blankets, strangely comforted by Maka's presence across the room. They had begun as captor and captive, then reluctant allies. Now, as winter descended, she found herself wondering what they might become when spring arrived. In her dreams that night, she saw her mother's face, not with the terror of her final moments, but smiling gently, as if in approval of the unlikely family her children had found. Winter descended in earnest, transforming the canyon into a realm of white silence. Inside the dwelling, life continued in its established rhythms. Thomas's leg had healed well, leaving only a thin scar that he displayed proudly. In the evenings, Sarah continued teaching Maka to read, while he shared Apache winter stories that had been passed down through generations. The snowstorm began near dusk, howling winds driving icy flakes against the dwelling. Maka secured the horses in their sheltered corral and reinforced the doorway covering before joining Sarah and Thomas inside. They huddled near the fire, listening to the storm's fury. Worst storm yet, Maka observed, adding wood to the flames. Sarah nodded, grateful for the sturdy walls surrounding them. Will the horses be all right? Protected from wind, Maka assured her. Strong animals. As night deepened, the storm's intensity increased. Sometime after midnight, Sarah was awakened by Maka's sudden alertness. He stood motionless, head tilted toward the doorway. What is it? She whispered, careful not to wake Thomas. Something outside, Maka replied, reaching for his knife. Stay here. Heart pounding, Sarah watched as he carefully moved the door covering aside and disappeared into the storm. The minutes stretched endlessly until he reappeared, supporting a half-conscious man in a snow-covered cavalry uniform. Soldier, Sarah gasped, helping Maka lower the man onto a mat near the fire. Scout, Maka corrected grimly. Lost in storm, nearly frozen. The man's face was deathly pale except for patches of frostbite on his cheeks and nose. As they removed his frozen outer garments, Sarah discovered blood soaking through his shirt, not from frostbite but a bullet wound in his shoulder. He's been shot, she said, looking questioningly at Maka. Not my doing, Maka replied, examining the wound. Old shot, maybe 2 days. As they worked to warm the scout and treat his injury, Thomas awakened, watching wide-eyed from his pallet. Sarah sent him to fetch clean water from their indoor supply while she and Maka continued their ministrations. The scout's eyelids fluttered as warmth gradually returned to his body. When his gaze focused on Maka, sudden terror animated his features. He tried to scramble backward, reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. Easy, Sarah soothed. You're safe. We're helping you. Apache, the man rasped, eyes fixed on Maka. Do you know who that is? His name is Maka, Sarah replied. He saved your life tonight. The scout shook his head weakly. Wanted man, butcher, killed Colonel Harrington's family. Sarah felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her. She turned to Maka, whose face had gone completely expressionless, the same mask he had worn when they first met. Is this true? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Maka's eyes met hers. No. The simplicity of his denial hung in the air between them. Thomas returned with the water, sensing the tension but not understanding its cause. Sarah? He questioned uncertainly. Thomas, Look through the scout's saddlebags, she instructed. See if there's anything to identify him. While Thomas complied, the scout drifted back into unconsciousness, the combination of his wound and exposure taking its toll. Sarah continued tending to him automatically, her mind racing. Could Maka truly be a murderer? Had they been living with a man capable of killing an innocent family? Sarah, Thomas called, his voice strange. I found something. He held out a folded paper that had been tucked into an inner pocket of the saddlebag. Sarah opened it to reveal a crude drawing of Makara's face beneath bold letters. Wanted Apache renegade. For the murder of Colonel James Harrington's wife and children, $500 reward. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked from the poster to Maka. Is this why you live alone? Why you're separated from your tribe? For a long moment, Maka was silent, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Harrington's family killed, yes. Not by me. By Nakohi, the war chief who came here. He put blame on me. Why would he do that? Sarah demanded. I spoke against raids on settlements. Said peace better than war. Mako's eyes reflected the fire's glow. Nakohi wanted war. Easier to lead warriors if I gone. Sarah studied his face, searching for truth. And the cavalry believed him? Soldiers see one Apache same as another, Maka said bitterly. Nakohi gave them my name. Enough for them. Thomas moved to stand beside Maka, his loyalty clear. I believe you. Sarah glanced at the unconscious scout, knowing their precarious situation had just become deadly. When he wakes, he'll report finding you. Yes, Maka agreed simply. What will you do? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. Maka looked at the scout, then back to Sarah. The choice hanging between them was clear. Silence the man permanently, or risk everything they had built together. Dawn broke with pale light filtering through the dwelling's smoke hole. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape outside. Inside, Sarah watched the cavalry scout's labored breathing, the man's silver insignia gleaming on his torn uniform. He would live, thanks to their care, but his presence had shattered their fragile peace. Maka entered silently, having checked the surroundings for any sign of other scouts. His face remained impassive, but Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his shoulders, the watchfulness in his eyes. No others nearby, he reported. Storm covered our tracks. What will you do with him? Sarah asked quietly, nodding toward the scout. Maka knelt beside the wounded man, studying him without expression. The question hung between them, the unspoken acknowledgement that the simplest solution would be to ensure the scout never reported back. Leave him supplies, Maka finally said. Water, food, medicine. When strong enough, he will return to fort. Relief flooded through Sarah. Despite everything, Maka would not take a life unnecessarily, even one that threatened his own. We must go, he continued. Not safe here now. Go where? Thomas asked, having awakened during their conversation. It's winter. Cave system. 3 days' journey south. Maka began gathering essential supplies. Used by my people in ancient times. Well hidden. Sarah glanced around the dwelling that had become home. The neat shelves of provisions they'd prepared for winter, the pallets where they slept, the fire pit where they'd shared meals and stories. Leaving meant abandoning not just shelter but the life they had built together. If we stay, the cavalry will come, she acknowledged reluctantly. Yes. Maka paused in his preparations. But choice must be yours. Scout can take you to fort. Safety there for white children. The offer stunned Sarah. Even now, facing recapture and possible execution, Maka was giving them an option to leave him, to return to their own people. Thomas responded instantly. We're staying with you. Thomas, Sarah cautioned. This is serious. We need to think. I have thought. Her brother interrupted with unexpected maturity. Maka is our family now. We don't abandon family. Sarah's eyes met Maka's across the room. The question in them was clear. And you? What do you choose? In that moment, Sarah realized her decision had been made long ago, perhaps as far back as the day she chose not to leave with the settlers. Whatever lay ahead, her place was with Maka. How soon can we be ready? She asked. Something flickered in Maka's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper. 1 hour. Take only what we need to survive. They worked quickly, packing dried meat, medicines, extra clothing, and essential tools. Sarah carefully wrapped her Bible, her mother's hairpin, and her journal, the tangible connections to both her past and the person she was becoming. The scouts stirred as they completed their preparations, his eyes opening to find Sarah placing water, food, and medicine within his reach. "What are you doing?" he mumbled. "Leaving," she replied simply. "There's enough here to keep you alive until you can travel." Confusion. Confusion crossed his face. "You're going with him? Willingly?" "Yes." Sarah straightened, a strange calm settling over her despite the danger ahead. "Maka is innocent of what you accuse him of. He's a good man." The scout shook his head weakly. "They'll hunt you too now. Kidnapping charges." "We weren't kidnapped," Thomas interjected from the doorway. "He saved us." Outside, Maka had prepared the horses, loading them with their meager possessions. The morning sun made the snow blindingly bright, the pristine landscape betraying no path to safety. Sarah paused for one last look at the dwelling before mounting her horse. This place had transformed her from a frightened girl into a woman of strength and purpose. Whatever hardships lay ahead, she would face them with the same resilience. As they rode away, Maka led them on a circuitous route designed to confuse any pursuers, doubling back and riding through flowing water when possible. By midday, they had traveled only a few miles as the crow flies, but had left a confusing trail for anyone who might follow. In a sheltered ravine, they paused to rest the horses. Maka approached Sarah, his breath visible in the cold air. "Still time," he said quietly. "Can take you back. Better chance alone." Sarah studied the man before her, the warrior who had become her protector, her teacher, and something she wasn't quite ready to name. She reached out and took his hand, her first truly deliberate touch. "We stay together," she said firmly. "All of us." Maka's fingers closed around hers, their warmth penetrating the winter cold. The gesture sealed a promise between them that went beyond words. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as captor and captive, but as equals who had chosen each other. 2 weeks of hard winter travel had tested their endurance to its limits. The cave system Maka had spoken of proved to be a series of interconnected chambers worn into a sandstone cliff, dry and defensible but far colder than their abandoned dwelling. They survived on dried provisions and what little game Maka could hunt in the snow-covered landscape. One evening, as Thomas slept deeply after a long day's hunting expedition, Maka unfolded a piece of hide on which he had drawn a crude map. Sarah leaned close, the firelight illuminating the markings. "We are here," Maka said, pointing to a location near the center. "Need to reach this place." His finger moved to the map's southern edge. "What's there?" Sarah asked. "Settlement. Special place." Maka's eyes met hers. "Apache and white people live together. Mixed families." Sarah's breath caught. "Such a place exists?" "Small. Hidden in mountain valley across territorial border. Started by Apache woman who married white trader. Now others like them live there." The implications were clear. A place where they wouldn't have to choose between worlds, where their unusual family might be accepted. "How far?" Sarah asked. 2 weeks good travel. Longer in winter. Maka traced the route with his finger. "Dangerous journey. Pass near fort. Cross open country." Sarah studied the map, committing it to memory. "If we were separated, how would I find it?" Maka seemed surprised by the question, but nodded in approval of her practicality. He carefully explained landmarks and water sources, drilling her until she could recite the route from memory. "Good," he said finally. "Smart to know way. I hope we won't need it," Sarah replied. "But it's wise to be prepared." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. In the flickering light, Sarah could see the question in Makara's gaze, the same one that had been growing between them for months. "Why stay with me?" he asked softly. "Safer with your own people." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I'm not sure who my people are anymore," she admitted. "The life I knew is gone. And you?" She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "You've become important to me, to both of us." Maka was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You became important to me also," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not as promised wife, as Sarah." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. This was no longer about Thomas's desperate bargain or Makara's compassion for orphan children. Something profound had grown between them, something neither had expected or sought. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound that made Maka stiffen. He moved to the cave entrance, listening intently. "Horses," he said grimly. "Many. Coming this way." Sarah felt cold fear grip her chest. "Cavalry?" "Yes. Patrol." Maka quickly gathered their essential supplies. "Wake Thomas. Must move now." As Sarah roused her brother, Maka extinguished their fire and obscured signs of their presence. Outside, the late afternoon light was fading, providing some cover for their escape. "Follow this ridge," Maka instructed, pointing to a rocky outcropping. "Stay in shadows. I create false trail, then join you." "We should stay together," Sarah protested. "Too dangerous," Maka countered. "I move faster alone. Can draw them away." Before she could argue further, the sound of horses grew louder. Maka cupped her face briefly, his touch conveying what words could not. "Trust me," he said. "Find you before nightfall." With Thomas's hand firmly in hers, Sarah followed Makara's instructions, staying low and moving carefully along the ridge. The winter landscape offered little cover, but the deepening shadows helped conceal their progress. Behind them, she could hear Makara's horse moving in the opposite direction, creating a diversion. As darkness fell, they reached the meeting point Maka had specified, a stand of juniper trees nestled against a rock face. Thomas, exhausted from the journey, leaned against Sarah. "Will he find us?" he whispered. "Yes," Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. "He always does." Hours passed with no sign of Maka. The night grew bitterly cold, forcing them to huddle together beneath their single blanket. Sarah strained her eyes against the darkness, searching for any movement, any sign of his return. When he finally appeared, moving silently through the shadows, Sarah nearly wept with relief. His clothing was torn and there was a fresh cut on his cheek, but he was alive. "Soldiers camped near caves," he reported. "Found our tracks but followed wrong ones. Safe for now." As they huddled together for warmth, Sarah reached for Makara's hand in the darkness. He hesitated only a moment before intertwining his fingers with hers, the first time they had held hands with such deliberate intent. A week of arduous travel brought them within sight of a small settlement nestled in a river valley. From their vantage point on a wooded ridge, they could see several buildings, a corral of horses, and thin wisps of smoke rising from chimneys. "Need supplies," Maka said, studying the settlement through narrowed eyes. "Almost out of food." Sarah knew he was right. Their provisions had dwindled dangerously, and Thomas's cheeks had grown hollow again. But entering the settlement carried enormous risk. "I should go," she suggested. "A woman alone will draw less suspicion." Maka frowned. "Dangerous." "Less dangerous for me than for you," Sarah countered. I can say I'm a widow traveling to meet family. They'll believe that more readily than any story you could tell. Though clearly reluctant, Maka recognized the logic in her plan. They spent the day preparing. Sarah washing in an icy stream and changing into her cleanest dress. Maka counting out the few coins they had saved from trading. Get only what we need, he instructed. Flour, coffee, salt. Maybe news if safe to ask. I'll be careful, she promised. As she prepared to leave, Maka surprised her by presenting a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a beautiful shawl of deep blue wool, adorned with subtle beadwork around the edges. For you, he said, traded for it at post. Was saving for safer time. Sarah ran her fingers over the fine fabric, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It's beautiful, she whispered. Proper woman needs proper things, Maka said simply. We'll help your widow story. Sarah wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, immediately feeling warmer, not just from the wool, but from the knowledge that Maka had been thinking of her comfort all those weeks ago at the trading post. She entered the settlement with her heart pounding but her expression carefully composed. The general store was mercifully busy, allowing her to blend in with other customers. She selected their supplies with deliberate care, listening to the conversations around her. Cavalry increased patrols after that Apache renegade was spotted. A man was saying to the storekeeper, Colonel Harrington's got a personal vendetta. Won't rest till he gets him. Can't blame him, the storekeeper replied. After what happened to his family. Heard they're sending a full company south next week. Another customer added. Sweeping the whole territory. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed her items on the counter. The storekeeper gave her a curious look. Don't believe we've seen you before, ma'am. Just passing through, Sarah replied, summoning a wan smile. My husband passed last spring. I'm traveling to join my brother's family in Arizona. The sympathy that immediately softened the man's face told her the story had worked. As he packaged her purchases, he added a small bag of hard candies. For the journey, he said kindly. No charge. Outside, Sarah forced herself to walk unhurriedly back toward the edge of town, her mind racing with the news she'd overheard. A full cavalry company would make reaching the sanctuary nearly impossible. They needed to move quickly. Maka and Thomas were waiting at the appointed place, relief evident in their expressions when she appeared. As they examined the supplies, Sarah related what she had learned about the increased patrols. Must travel at night now, Maka decided. Slower, but safer. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow far from any trail. After eating a proper meal for the first time in days, Thomas fell asleep quickly, exhaustion overcoming even his usual curiosity. Sarah found Maka sitting apart, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She joined him, drawing the blue shawl closer around her shoulders. Thank you again for the shawl, she said softly. It's the finest thing I've owned since the raid. Maka nodded, his profile strong against the twilight. In my tribe, he said after a moment, when man gives woman blue cloth has special meaning. Means he sees her as mate, partner in life path. Sarah's breath caught. Did you know that when you traded for it? Yes. Maka turned to face her directly. Not right time then to speak of such things. Not sure if right time now. But time grows short, path dangerous ahead. The simple honesty of his words touched Sarah deeply. This was no flowery courtship like she had once dreamed of, but something far more profound. A connection forged through shared hardship and growing respect. Among my people, she said carefully, a man would ask a woman's father for permission to court her. A shadow crossed Maka's face. Your father not here. Cannot ask. No, Sarah agreed. But Thomas is my family now. And he already gave me to you, remember? The reminder of Thomas's desperate offer brought an unexpected lightness to the moment. Maka's lips curved in a rare smile. Strange beginning, he acknowledged. But perhaps a better ending than either of us imagined, Sarah finished softly. In the gentle darkness, Maka took her hands in his. With quiet dignity, he spoke words in Apache, then translated, "Great Spirit, see this woman who walks beside me. Give us protection on shared path. Make us one heart, one breath, one life." The simple ceremony, performed beneath a canopy of stars, held more meaning for Sarah than any elaborate church wedding could have. When Maka leaned forward to touch his forehead to hers, an Apache gesture of deep intimacy, she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Now you are truly my wife," he whispered. "Not because boy offered, but because we choose." Their moment of peace was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Maka tensed, instantly alert. "Riders coming," he said grimly. "Many." Chaos erupted in moments. Maka thrust his hunting knife into Thomas's hands, his instructions swift and urgent. "Take south path. Follow ridge. Remember map." He turned to Sarah, his face taut with urgency. "Go. Now." "We stay together," Sarah insisted, gripping his arm. "Too many soldiers," Maka countered. "I lead away. You take Thomas to safety." Before she could protest further, he cupped her face in his hands. "Find you," he promised. "Always find you." With those words, he swung onto his horse and rode boldly into the open, deliberately making noise to draw attention. Sarah watched in horror as he became a silhouette against the night sky, deliberately visible to the approaching riders. "Sarah, come on." Thomas tugged at her hand, his young face determined despite his fear. Heartbreaking, Sarah followed her brother into the darkness, ducking low through underbrush as Maka had taught them. Behind them, shouts confirmed the cavalry had spotted their quarry. The thunder of hooves moved away from their position. Maka's diversion was working. They fled through the night, Thomas leading with surprising confidence, using stars to navigate as Maka had taught him. When dawn broke, they found themselves in a steep ravine miles from their camp, exhausted but safe for the moment. "We need to find water," Sarah said, assessing their situation. "Then decide what to do." Thomas pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods in the distance. "Trees mean water." As they approached the grove, movement caught Sarah's eye. She pulled Thomas behind a boulder, watching tensely as a figure emerged from the trees. Not a soldier, but a young Apache boy of perhaps 12 years, filling a water skin at a small spring. "We need that water," Thomas whispered. "And maybe he knows something about Maka." Before Sarah could stop him, Thomas stepped into view, hands raised to show he carried no weapon. The boy startled, nearly dropping his water skin. "We're friends of Maka," Thomas said carefully, using the Apache pronunciation Maka had taught him. The boy's eyes widened with recognition at the name. He spoke rapidly in Apache, then, seeing their confusion, switched to broken English. "Maka? Tall warrior? Scar here." He gestured to his forearm. "Yes." Sarah stepped forward eagerly. "Have you seen him?" The boy's expression grew grave. "Soldiers take. Many soldiers." Sarah felt the ground sway beneath her feet. "When? Where?" Through gestures and simple words, the boy explained that he had witnessed Maka's capture from a hiding place. The cavalry had taken him toward their camp at dawn. "How far?" Sarah asked urgently. The boy pointed west, indicating perhaps 2 hours' journey. Then, with obvious hesitation, he offered them his water skin. "Maka friend to my father once," he explained. "Save from sickness." This unexpected alliance gave Sarah hope. "Can you help us find the camp?" The boy, who called himself Kale, agreed to guide them close enough to see the cavalry camp without being detected. As they traveled, he revealed that his family belonged to a small band that had broken from the main tribe, seeking peace rather than war. They knew of Maka's reputation as a healer and respected him despite the accusations against him. By midday, they lay hidden atop a ridge overlooking the cavalry encampment, a collection of tents and picket lines for horses set up in a small meadow. Sarah's heart sank at the sight of so many soldiers, at least 30 by her quick count. "There," Kayleigh whispered, pointing to a tree at the camp's edge where a solitary figure sat bound. Even from a distance, Sarah recognized Maka. His head was bowed, but his posture remained proud despite his bonds. A surge of determination rose within her. Somehow she would free him. "They move at sunset," Kayleigh informed them. "Take prisoner to fort." Sarah studied the camp layout, committing it to memory. "Thomas, we need a diversion after dark. Something to draw soldiers away from that side of camp." Thomas clutched Maka's knife, his expression resolute. "I can do it." "It's too dangerous," Sarah protested. "Maka would do it for us," Thomas replied with simple certainty. "He is family now." Sarah couldn't argue with her brother's logic. She turned to Kayleigh. "Will you help us?" The boy hesitated, clearly conflicted. Finally, he nodded. "Maka good man. Not killer, they say." As they formulated their plan, Sarah found herself drawing on everything Maka had taught them. How to move silently, how to read terrain, how to think like both predator and prey. The frightened girl who had once offered herself as a reluctant bride was gone. In her place stood a woman determined to save the man she had come to love. "We'll wait until full dark," she decided. "Then we move." Looking at the determined faces of her young companions, Sarah felt a fierce pride. Against all odds, they would attempt what seemed impossible. And if they failed, at least they would fail together, fighting for someone worth saving. Night descended over the cavalry camp, bringing with it their only chance to save Maka. Sarah crouched in the shadows at the edge of the perimeter, watching as soldiers gathered around fires for evening meals. In the fading light, she could see Maka more clearly now. His face bruised, his posture unnaturally stiff, suggesting broken ribs or worse. Around his neck hung a military medallion, likely placed there to mark him as Colonel Harrington's special prisoner. "Everyone knows their parts?" Sarah whispered to her companions. Thomas nodded grimly, clutching a bundle of dry brush. Kayleigh, who had proved invaluable in their planning, indicated the eastern edge of the camp. "Soldiers less there. 2 guards only." Sarah squeezed both boys' shoulders. "Be careful. If anything goes wrong, run for the sanctuary. Remember the route." When the camp had settled into evening routines, Thomas and Kayleigh crept toward the opposite side. Sarah counted slowly, giving them time to get into position, then waited for their signal. It came with startling effectiveness, a series of small fires igniting almost simultaneously along the western edge of the camp, followed by Thomas's voice crying out in perfect mimicry of Apache war calls. The deception worked exactly as planned. Soldiers scrambled toward the apparent attack, leaving only the 2 guards Kayleigh had identified near Maka. Sarah moved swiftly, using the skills Maka had taught her to cross the open ground without detection. She reached the first guard from behind, striking him with a rock to the temple, not hard enough to kill, but sufficient to render him unconscious. The second guard turned at the sound, but before he could shout, Kayleigh appeared from nowhere, tackling him with surprising strength for his size. "Hurry!" the boy hissed, struggling to subdue the larger man. Sarah rushed to Maka, whose eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of her. "What are you doing?" he rasped as she worked to cut his bonds. "Rescuing my husband," she replied, the rope finally giving way beneath her knife. Maka staggered as he rose, clearly in pain. "Cannot run," he admitted. "Ribs broken." "Lean on me," Sarah insisted, supporting his weight as best she could. They had made it only halfway to the tree line when a commanding voice rang out. "Hold there." Sarah turned to find a tall officer leveling a pistol at them, his uniform adorned with the insignia of a colonel. The medallion around Maka's neck matched the one hanging from the officer's chest, Colonel Harrington himself. "Step away from the savage, Miss," Harrington ordered. "You're being rescued." I don't need rescuing, Sarah replied, standing her ground. This man is innocent of what you accuse him of. Harrington's face hardened. Innocent? He butchered my wife and children in cold blood. No, he didn't, came Thomas's voice as he emerged from the shadows, Mako's knife held protectively before him. It was another Apache, a war chief named Nakohi. Convenient to blame someone else, Harrington sneered. Sir, a younger officer approached, drawn by the confrontation. What's happening? Sarah saw an opportunity in the lieutenant's less hardened expression. The colonel is pursuing a personal vendetta without evidence, she stated clearly. Maka was framed by a rival who wanted him gone. Lies, Harrington spat. This Apache was identified by witnesses. What witnesses? Sarah challenged. Other Apache who were told to name him? Or settlers who can't tell one Apache from another? The lieutenant looked uncertainly between them. Colonel, perhaps we should question. I don't need to question vermin, Harrington interrupted, his pistol unwavering. Step aside, girl. Now. Instead, Sarah moved more firmly in front of Maka. If you want him, you'll have to shoot me first. Sarah, no. Maka protested weakly behind her. The standoff hung in the charged air, Harrington's finger tightening on the trigger. Then, with startling swiftness, Maka pushed Sarah aside and lunged at the colonel despite his injuries. The pistol discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet grazing Maka's shoulder as they fell together. Stop! The lieutenant shouted, drawing his own weapon. Colonel, stand down. But Harrington was beyond reason, his face contorted with rage as he wrestled with Maka in the dirt. The medallion had torn free in the struggle, revealing a hidden compartment containing a folded paper. Thomas darted forward with a child's quickness, snatching the paper before anyone could stop him. He unfolded it, his eyes widening. Lieutenant, he called. Look at this. The young officer hesitated, then took the paper from Thomas. His expression changed as he read whatever was written there. Colonel Harrington, he said, his voice suddenly formal. I'm relieving you of command. Effective immediately. Other soldiers had gathered now, watching in confusion as their commanding officer was restrained by two sergeants. The lieutenant addressed them with quiet authority. The colonel has been conducting an unauthorized vendetta. This document proves he falsified evidence to frame this Apache. Sarah hardly registered the words, her attention fixed on Maka, who lay bleeding on the ground. She knelt beside him, cradling his head. Stay with me, she whispered. Please stay with me. His eyes focused on her face, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain. Told you, he murmured. Always find you. As the camp erupted in confusion around them, Sarah held Maka's hand. Their fingers intertwined just as their lives had become separate paths now inextricably joined. For better or worse, 6 months later, spring blossoms dotted the mountain valley that sheltered the mixed settlement of New Hope. Children of various skin tones played together in the central clearing, their laughter rising above the sounds of daily work. Among them, Thomas Reynolds stood out with his sun-bleached hair and confident stance as he instructed younger children in the art of bow making. Sarah watched from the doorway of their modest cabin, pride warming her heart. Her brother had flourished here, becoming fluent in both Apache and English, serving as a natural bridge between cultures. At 13, he was already respected for his hunting skills and his ability to move between two worlds with ease. He becomes a leader, Maka observed, joining her in the doorway. Though his wounds had healed, he still moved with careful deliberation, some days more than others. Like his teacher, Sarah replied, slipping her hand into his. Their arrival at the settlement had initially been met with caution, but the community had welcomed them once their story spread. Here, their relationship raised no eyebrows. They were far from the first couple to bridge the divide between Apache and settler traditions. In February, they had formalized their union in both traditions, a simple church ceremony followed by Apache marriage rites. Sarah had worn her mother's silver hairpin and a dress gifted by the settlement's women. Maka had stood tall in a mixture of traditional Apache and settler clothing, his quiet dignity evident to all. "Letter came," Maka said, handing Sarah an envelope. "From Fort." Sarah opened it eagerly, scanning the contents. "Colonel Harrington has been court-martialed," she announced. The lieutenant testified about the falsified evidence. "Nakohe has been identified as the true culprit in the attack." "Justice comes slow," Maka observed. "But it comes." The news was bittersweet. Harrington's vendetta had cost them their first home and caused Maka great suffering. Yet it had also led them here, to a community where they could truly belong. "The lieutenant asks if we'll return to testify at Nakohe's trial," Sarah continued. Maka considered this. "What do you wish?" "I think we should go," she replied. "For closure, if nothing else. And to show others that there can be peace between our peoples." He nodded, accepting her wisdom. In their months together, they had developed a partnership of equals, each bringing different strengths to their union. Later that afternoon, they walked together to the settlement's small cemetery where two new markers stood beside others. Simple wooden crosses Sarah had carved for her parents. Though their bodies remained at the raided settlement, Sarah had needed a place to honor them. Beyond these, Maka had placed traditional Apache memorial stones for his first wife and son. The dual monuments represented the blending of their histories, the acknowledgement of all that had brought them to each other. "They would be proud of you," Maka said as Sarah placed wildflowers at the base of her parents' markers. "I hope so," she replied. "Sometimes I wonder what my father would think of us. Perhaps he sees now, beyond prejudice." Maka's hand rested on her shoulder. In spirit world, truth is clear. They continued to the settlement's edge where a local artist had recently completed a family portrait. Sarah, Maka, and Thomas posed together, their expressions peaceful yet determined. The artist had captured something essential about them, the resilience that had forged them into a family. Sarah had hung the portrait in their cabin beside her mother's silver locket, which she had opened to display her parents' tiny painted likenesses. Past and present, side by side, not in conflict but in continuation. As they returned home, Thomas ran to meet them, excitedly reporting that Kayleigh's family had decided to join the settlement permanently. The young Apache boy who had helped save Maka had become Thomas's closest friend. That evening, as they gathered around their table with neighbors, a mixture of Apache families, white settlers, and other mixed couples like themselves, Sarah felt a deep contentment. The journey that had begun with tragedy and desperation had led to something beautiful. A family chosen rather than given. Love that had grown from the ashes of loss. Later, as Maka braided her hair for the night, a tender ritual they had established, Sarah caught his reflection in their small mirror. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking in two desperate children that day?" Maka's hands paused in their work. He met her eyes in the mirror, his gaze steady and sure. "That day thought I was saving you," he replied. "Now no truth." "What truth?" His smile was gentle as he finished the braid and turned her to face him.